Now, I'd like to open it to the floor for questions. Obviously, as David is remote and he can't actually see us, I just ask, we do have microphones, and if when you ask a question, if you can just identify yourself first, please, so David knows who he's talking to. Who has any question they'd like to ask? Yeah.
Thanks so much. David, Elizabeth Fortescue from the Daily Telegraph in Sydney. I was just wondering how much time you're going to be spending in Sydney each particular year.
There'll be a minimum of 8 weeks in Sydney doing concerts, and then probably at least 2 weeks of touring on the international tours. And it's fairly flexible how it's worked out. But I think that with this, there will be sort of periods that I can be in Sydney to do really intense projects and long sort of developments, so that there can be a really close relationship with the orchestra.
David, Anne-Maria Nicholson from ABC News. David, in Australia, the Sydney Symphony is probably faring better than a lot, but a lot of orchestras have struggled for government funding and support both here and in other countries. And there are moves to sort of shift funding to perhaps more modern technology, the digital world, etc. I'm wondering, does that worry you? Do you fear for the future of large orchestras and their funding?
I think it's always a challenge to fund an artistic project like a world-class orchestra. At the same time, I think that this is something that you need to look at very carefully, because you can misread the nature of what the enterprise is. I often talk to people about, in business, one streamlines things, one makes sure that a product is put forward in the most correct way possible with the least amount of waste, and that the effort is all perfectly focused. Art is something that is much closer to the experience you have when you're a parent with a child. You can only streamline your 4-year-old so much before you realize that this is a process that actually shouldn't ever be looked that way. There's clearly a bottom line in an organization which employs people and which needs to maintain a world-class level. But at the same time, part of the challenge is to remember that you can never put a bottom line, or you can't circumscribe within limits what the experience that any of us, audience members in all sorts of different contexts, can take away from the kind of experience that you have in a live musical setting. And so this is the thing that I feel is really important to remember. When you're doing a concert, when you're playing a piece of music, whether people are coming into a rehearsal, I love it in the Sydney Symphony when you're rehearsing and a tour group comes in, and the orchestra will wave up at them and say, and be welcoming. You never know what it is you're providing for people. You never know how you may be the spark that changes someone's life for the better forever. And the symphony orchestra is a cumbersome institution. It's built on the knowledge and the notion that lots of people who are really very good at what they do can produce something in real time that feels like a miracle. And that's the sort of thing which, in the end, is transformative and never can be connected up with an actual price tag. So I'm lucid about the challenges of funding for the arts worldwide. I see them all the time. You have constraints that you have to deal with. And yet, I go back to this method of parenting. The reason that you do it is because the love and the joy and the indescribable wonder of what happens in this transmission from one person to another, or from one person to many, or from one group to many, is something that is essential to the well-being of humanity. And a symphony orchestra and music in general is very definitely the bedrock of what it is that keeps us human and a civilized and wonderful society.
Well said.
You only need 2 questions with me and you're there for about 3 hours, so I warn you.
David, hello. This is Emma Ayres from ABC Classic FM, the National Classical Music Network. Which Australian composers are you planning to commission works from?
You know, I've been talking to Peter Chorney about that, and we've just started the sort of discussions. What I'd like to do is both look at a sort of 2-pronged approach. One of the things that I noticed when I was working with the Ensemble Intercontemporain in Paris, it's a group that is dedicated to music of the 20th and 21st centuries. And I found that we quite often would commission works, and the commissioned works would take the concert space that we might have given to works that were really good, but we'd only played once. And so one of the things I was interested in doing with Peter Chorney, and we'll start to do this summer, is to look not only at the composers who are interesting and the ones that we already know, George Lenz, Hinson, the various different people that we're already working with, but to look at not only who is out there, but who are the interesting composers who've written really great works that have not been performed often enough, and to see where we might be able to insert those into a program so that there's an actual appreciation not only of what the Australian composers are doing now and where they're going, but also where they've come from and how that context works for Australian musical culture as well as the larger musical culture of the world. And so I think that's kind of the thing, is this combination of commissioning pieces as well as not losing sight of the fact that we have a lot of really great pieces that were commissioned at one point and need to be played again.
Thanks, David. I might ask Peter Chorney whether you have anything you want to add to that, Peter?
Yes, and firstly, David, looking forward enormously to having that conversation with you in the summer when you're here. We are talking about a number of major international collaborations on the commissioning front. And we are already discussing various projects for next year, the following year, and the year after. At this stage, I think it's premature to mention names, but there will be some key names that are familiar to you all. We're also looking at international collaborations, as has been mentioned before, with orchestras around the world to co-commission works by Australians and other composers. So there will be quite a lot of activity in this area, and we'll be sharing all that with you in due course.
Good, all right. Well, thanks very much. Do we have another question? Sorry, just Tom.
Tom Breen, David, a supporter of the orchestra. You're probably the first American director that we've had. Certainly Mr. Ashkenazi and his predecessor brought a huge lump of Europe with them. What specifically American do you think you can bring to audiences and the orchestra from your American experience as opposed to your international experience?
That's a good question. I guess because one of the things that I really like and enjoy about America is this notion of possibility. And this is actually one of the things when my wife Orly Shaham and I first came to Australia, it was one of the things that we both spoke about and that we noticed immediately. There's this incredible drive to do something when it's a good idea and to do something that hasn't been done before. And so I think that's kind of what I've been looking forward to bringing my own version of. I haven't really been thinking of it in terms of repertoire or ways of acting, mainly because I think the Sydney Symphony already does so many things right. That's one of the big attractions for me. The way in which they play in the most famous concert hall in the world. Everyone recognizes it. And so the orchestra is not only welcoming to Sydneysiders as their patrons, but they are interested in broadening their reach in Sydney, and they're unbelievably welcoming to people who come as tourists and just want to see this famous landmark. And they come in and they hear the symphony, and you can feel the players really just embracing everyone in the performance. And I've had various different programs where you can sense that that's what it is they're doing. And this is such a great quality to have. I think of this as something that Americans also do, that they're very good at. But I don't want to, I don't think of it in terms of nationalities so much. I will say, though, that I do think that the Australians make the much better coffee. And I'm so pleased that they do, because we've come a long way in this country, but we're still not anywhere close to what you can do, with a flat white.
Now, another question here.
Mr. Robertson, James Jeffrey from The Australian. If you ask Vladimir Ashkenazy about Shostakovich, you can be there 2-3 hours later and he's still going. I was just wondering which composer or which composer's work do you have the strongest emotional relationship with?
That's a toughie. My wife always says, I don't have a favorite composer, but if I did, it would be Brahms. And I look at it more, I have 4 boys who are all beautiful and amazing. And if you were to ask me which is my favorite, there's nothing I can do. I feel much more like a canine where everything is a superlative. So you ask about this composer and I say, oh my gosh, they're wonderful, they're the best. And then you mention another composer and they're the best. And I think part of the reason for this is that for me, composers are these amazing beings who have managed to create a completely individual beauty, clearly connected up to the culture that they're writing in. So someone who's writing on the Indian subcontinent is able to take that culture and that experience and transform it into tones. Someone with a Central European background takes that, but everyone has their individual way of expressing these things, their individual way of defining beauty. And it's that uniqueness of the composers and of the repertoire, despite the fact that the repertoire is huge. It's this uniqueness of each individual composer and each individual piece, which is what fascinates me the most. And so, in a sense, my favorite composer tends to be the one I'm listening to right at that moment. I just finished doing a concert in London a couple of months ago of all works by Brett Dean. And when I came off of the stage, if you'd said, who's your favorite composer, I would have had to say Brett Dean. A few weeks after that, I was performing in St. Louis Bach's B minor Mass. And you think, what a blessing it is to have people who can just pull these tones out of the air and put them together, and an entire world is created. And they're the only ones who can do this. And we're, as musicians, so amazingly lucky that, unlike, say, actors who are locally connected up to a language and have to remain in that language, and even if they go outside of the language, it's very clear that they're outside of their home language. A place like Australia, that so many people call home and that so many people have come to, much in the same way as my native North America, has the ability, and I've noticed this with the Sydney Symphony, of being able to just converse in all of these different dialects as though it's mother tongue. And I think that's the aspect that I really like about all of the different composers. And in fact, part of the thing that's fun when you mentioned Ashkenazy is that much of what I feel I now get with Sibelius, with Shostakovich, comes from, and Prokofiev, comes from what I heard Ashkenazi doing. And what I learned from the way that he would shape a phrase, or the way that he would play something on the piano, or the colors he would get from a dark Sibelius opening. This is part of the whole experience of music communicating across cultures and across personalities. And so that's I guess, my answer is, I don't really have a favorite composer, but if I did, it would be all of them.
Mr. Robertson, Henry Benjamin from JWire. Your wife is an accomplished musician in her own right. Can we expect her to have any engagements with the SSO?
I certainly hope so. She's coming down with me in a couple of weeks to play a performance of the Australian premiere, in fact, of a composition that was written for her by the composer Steve Mackey. And one of the marvelous things about that is that they actually worked together on it. Steve saw us having our children together. We have twins together who are now 4.5. And just after we had these twins, Steve and his wife also had a baby boy. And the whole experience of being, parents of very young kids while working on this sort of commission meant that in the end, the piece that was written was something absolutely spectacular and touching and moving. It's called Stumble to Grace, and it's about this sort of experience of, a child who comes in and, hits at the piano and looks and what's going on with this, to the point where at the end there's this development and there's this person who comes out of all of this extraordinary capacity of the biology at the beginning. And so to have someone like Orly come and play this in Australia is something that I think is such a great opportunity, both for me, for her, for the audience of Sydney. I certainly hope that there'll be other moments. One of the really nice memories that I have when I think back of the Sydney Symphony is actually being backstage when our twins were only 10 months old, and the Mozart in the City concerts, there was Orly out on stage doing a play conduct with the musicians, and they were doing all of this really wonderful chamber music like Mozart piano concerto, while I was backstage making sure that both boys didn't start screaming or need anything. And I think there's that sense of music being a part of life, which is something that I look forward to in Sydney. And so I do hope that she will be able to perform with us whenever she's down there.
Question here.
Hi, David. It's Melissa from Limelight Magazine. Just wondering if you can tell us who else you have your eye on to bring out.
Ooh, I don't know if I can talk out of school. One of the things with this is that you're very excited and you've got all these plans, and you should probably put up a kind of a watch this space notice. I think I would defer to Peter Chorney in terms of where we are in the planning and when announcements are made for various different things. But it's true, I've been very lucky to work with a lot of great artists, and I look forward to being able to introduce them to the Sydney Symphony if they don't already know it. One of the great experiences that I had with the Sydney Symphony was with the pianist Yefim Bronfman, who came down and played the Tchaikovsky First Piano Concerto. And what really amazed me about the orchestra was that they had just finished playing a competition where they must have played 19 or 20 Tchaikovsky First Piano Concertos. And so you would think that they would, have had it up to here, or they would look at it and they would immediately reach for the little white bag, and not a bit of it. They were so completely involved in all of the colors and all of the shadings, particularly that Fima, the pianist, brought to this, that it was one of the most satisfying performances of that work that he or I has ever had the privilege of being involved with. And he said so to me. He said, it's just amazing what they did. There was this quality that he had to playing a certain passage, probably because he had recently played some chamber music and understood that Debussy had played that chamber music and saw the line between Tchaikovsky and Debussy in the actual piano concerto and the writing of Debussy for the piano. And so he brought that retroactively back into the Tchaikovsky in a way that very few pianists do. And I explained this to the orchestra, and they suddenly went, French with a Russian accent. It was just marvelous. And so the thing is, once you have an experience like that, or once you say to an artist, look, come here if you want to try this, because this orchestra can do anything. They will do whatever it is that you're looking for. That's the sort of thing that everyone finds extremely attractive. So I'm looking forward to getting as many other people as excited about the Sydney Symphony as I am.
And we look forward to unveiling those plans in due course. Okay, well, David, thank you so much for your time today. It's been wonderful having you with us. We very much look forward to seeing you in Sydney in June and July for your concerts with us. To Minister Crean, thank you so much for joining us and for your words of support. It's very deeply appreciated, as indeed is all the support we get from the federal government and from the state government. And to all of you, thank you very much indeed. We're very excited about this partnership, as you can probably tell. We think that David's leadership, alongside then the continuing presence of Mr. Ashkenazi, really is something which Sydney can really look forward to from 2014 onwards. We're very excited for our musicians, our audiences, and indeed for what this means for the Sydney Symphony internationally, particularly, as we have heard, in Asia. So thank you very much indeed for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you at David's concerts next month. Thank you very much indeed. Okay.